Since taking over management of the Beatles, Brian Epstein had his sights set further afield from shows in the clubs of Liverpool. He wanted the group to perform in more reputable ballrooms and theaters, to appear on television and radio, and to secure a recording contract. On the 10th of January, 1962, he visited the BBC's Manchester headquarters to complete a 3-page application for an audition by the Variety department. The hope was that he could get the Beatles an audition before radio producers, who would then call on them to perform on their shows. Epstein's application was approved, and the Beatles traveled to the BBC, Piccadilly, Manchester, to play before Peter Pilbeam, a producer for radio shows aimed at teenagers, made in the northwest of England, but broadcast throughout the nation. The Beatles played 4 songs: Like Dreamers Do, Till There Was You, Memphis, Tennessee, and Hello Little Girl. The first 2 were sung by Paul McCartney, with John Lennon taking vocals on the latter 2. On the 7th of March in 1962, the Beatles recorded their radio debut at the Playhouse Theatre, Home, Manchester. The recording was for the show Teenagers Turn, Here We Go. The band rehearsed their set from 3:45 p.m. in the evening, wearing suits for the very first time. The Beatles performed 3 cover versions: Dream Baby, How Long Must I Dream, Memphis, Tennessee, and Please Mr. Postman. Together with the other 3 acts also appearing on the program, the recording took place between 8 and 8:45 p.m. On the 10th of April, Stuart Sutcliffe, ex-Beatles bass guitarist in their early period, died of a brain hemorrhage. He'd been suffering from increasingly severe headaches and blackouts since settling in Hamburg with Astrid Kircher, his German fiancée. The cause of these remained uncertain, though Sutcliffe believed they were a consequence of overwork. On April 11th, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Pete Best flew out of Manchester, destined for Germany, for their first residency at the Starr Club in Hamburg. George Harrison was unwell at the time, so he flew to Germany the following day with the Beatles manager Brian Epstein. Lennon, McCartney, and Best were met at the airport in Hamburg by Astrid Kircher to tell them the devastating news. June 6 was the date of the Beatles' first visit to EMI Studios at 3 Abbey Road, St. John's Wood, London. The session took place in Studio 2 from 7 to 10 p.m. The Beatles first ran through several songs and then recorded 4. Precise numbers of takes are unknown, but they were taped in the following order: Bésame Mucho, Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, and Ask Me Why. August 15th was Pete Best's final show with the Beatles. This was the Beatles' 91st evening show at the Cavern Club. It was also the 38th occasion on which they performed both lunchtime and evening shows at the venue. More significantly, it was Pete Best's final show with the Beatles, 2 years and 3 days after he first performed with them. The Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, asked Best to come to the NEMS office the following day, although the drummer failed to see anything unusual in the request.
Sort of clash of personalities. The boys, the Beatles, they've been over here several times. And to me, they seem to have a say in everything that happens, I would have imagined. I don't know them that well.
Well, I think they've always been like that, not just since Brian has taken them over. They've always been like that. They've always sort of had a little bit to say. But from the point of clash of personalities, well, probably that may be it, because Peter did have a terrific fan club, compared to the others.
It's too good looking, perhaps, eh?
Well, I'll leave that for the other people to say, but from my point of view, we haven't come here to sort of throw any sticks and stones at the boys, because there is no really hard feeling. There was at first, but as I say, success is hard to come by, and these things do happen. But it's just the way that it was done that has annoyed us, that's all. If it had been done a bit more straightforward, it would have been more to the mark.
I've forgotten about it now, I don't know what they have.
Yeah.
But the way I look at it, just let it lie now. Except for the reports in the papers, and it gets me a bit niggled at times.
They keep going having a go at you, do they?
Yeah,
What do they say mainly?
Well, drummer wasn't too good, the beat wasn't so hot,
How do you get on with Ringo? Do you talk to Ringo?
Well, I haven't seen Ringo for donkey's years. I used to be good mates of his. you know, before the replacement took place. We're still mates now, like, but I haven't seen him to have a chat with him or anything like that.
Pete Best was probably the best looking of the bunch. He was very quiet with a sullen kind of charm.
Pete initially in Liverpool was the most popular member of the Beatles, particularly with the girl fans. And whenever the Beatles used to appear, all the girls used to shout and scream for Pete.
But he couldn't play drums very well. I mean, couldn't keep in time too well. And I was aware that the band weren't tight. They needed that sort of binding force that a good drummer should give them. So I said to Brian, well, I'll get another drummer for the recording sessions. You can do what you like with him on stage, but we'll have someone else on the tracks. And I didn't realize until afterwards that they'd been thinking the same thing anyway.
Following the sacking of Pete Best, the Beatles were quick to recruit their new drummer. Ringo Starr wasn't a stranger to the band, having stood in for them on several occasions in Hamburg and Liverpool, where he primarily played for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Ringo first played on the same bill as the Beatles on the 13th of March in 1959, on the opening night of the Morgue Skiffle Cellar in Liverpool. He was playing with Al Caldwell's Texans, and further down the bill were the Quarrymen. Caldwell later became Rory Storm. The Quarrymen, of course, were to become the Beatles.
I think one of the biggest changes I do remember from the Beatles was when Pete Best was given the sack. We were actually invited along to see Brian Epstein at the time. He just signed the Mezzabit up, so we went along to the office, and Pete Best was walking out of the office as we were going in with a very long face. We said hello to him, he completely ignored us and walked past. And we found out later that Brian had said to him, I'm afraid we're bringing a new drummer in, we're bringing Ringo Starr in, but if you want to stay in the business, I suggest that you join the Mezzabits. Well, he turned that down by saying, I'm not going to join those little kids. But as it happened, we wouldn't have had Pete anyway, because we were quite happy with John Banks, who was our drummer at the time, quite happy. But I did notice a great change in the band then. And after that, we went along, we appeared with them at the Cavern the next day. And I remember they were doing a lunchtime session, and as they turned up, George had been assaulted outside. This was to do the first show with Ringo Starr. And George came in with a big black eye, and we said, what's happened to you? And he said, they're all taking it out on me. He said, they're frightened to take it out on John because he'll flatten them, so they've all picked on me. They've all punched me. He said, it's my fault for throwing Pete Best out, because Pete Best had such a legion of fans. He was possibly the most popular at the very early days, because he was so good looking and so handsome and very quiet, and he had all the girls screaming for him at the time. But I think the sound changed as soon as Ringo joined the band. To me, it was slightly different. He did a different bass drum pattern. Pete was a lot simpler, a lot heavier player. And to me, they went more to an all-round band than the heavy rock and roll as they started off with. I mean, as it happened, they went from strength to strength then, but I think the sound somehow wasn't quite the same.
I remember one event where it sort of changed, and I realised the Beatles were going to make it. I mean, from day one I knew they were going to make it. I just knew they were going to do something. I didn't know how big they were going to be, but I knew they were going to be big, not just around Liverpool, not just around Merseyside. One of the first reasons for me saying that is I remember them coming back from, Ringo joined them by then, and they'd been to record, and it was the follow-up to Love Me Do, it was Please Please Me, and they changed it quite a bit. They wrote it initially as a Roy Orbison type of song, you know, like last night I said these words to my girl, one of those, you know. And they came back with a new interpretation of it, faster, Paul singing a top melody over John, and George coming in with Paul doing the backing vocals, and it just blew me away. And I remember getting shivers down me. They were playing it live, the new version of it, live on the Cavern, around the corner from here. And I just said, oh my God, that's it, that's the one, that's going to be #1 all over the world. And to make a bold statement like that, which I did to myself and to friends as well, as a 15-year-old boy, was something else. you know, but I realised then that they were going to do it. It was just, the way they changed it, it was just an immediate #1 record.
On Thursday, August 23rd, John Lennon marries Cynthia Powell at the Mount Pleasant Register office in Liverpool. Brian Epstein was the best man, and George Harrison and Paul McCartney were also in attendance. Absent was John's Aunt Mimi, who disapproved of the union, although Cynthia's half-brother and his wife were there. Tuesday, September 4th, the Beatles record How Do You Do It and Love Me Do. Following the Beatles' first session for EMI on the 6th of June, 1962, they returned for a second attempt at recording their debut single. This was Ringo Starr's first recording session with the group. In the morning, the group had flown down from Liverpool Airport. They checked into a hotel in Chelsea and arrived at Abbey Road shortly after midday. Before the recording session, the Beatles undertook a rehearsal, overseen by EMI's Ron Richards, during which they repeatedly ran through 6 songs. 2 of these, Love Me Do and How Do You Do It, were chosen to be recorded by the group. The rehearsal lasted between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. During it, they also played a slower, bluesy version of Please Please Me, which featured George Harrison playing the main motif throughout the song. On September 11th, following their studio session of September 4th, the Beatles recorded How Do You Do It and Love Me Do. EMI hastily arranged for them to return to London for a third attempt to complete their debut single. The session, which lasted from 5 p.m. to 6:45 p.m., was produced by Ron Richards, although George Martin arrived halfway through. Ringo Starr was relegated to playing the maracas on a remake of P.S. I Love You and tambourine on Love Me Do. George Martin was concerned with the quality of Ringo Starr's drumming on the original Love Me Do, and so arranged for an experienced session drummer, Andy White, to play on the session. White was paid a standard fee of £5.15.
Brian Epstein walked into my office one day and said he got a group that he wanted me to hear. Brian had apparently taken one of his tapes into the EMI store in Oxford Street to get it transferred to disc. And the engineer heard it and thought it was very good. Brian told him how he'd been to every record company in the country and hadn't gotten anywhere with it. And he saw me because I had a reputation at that time for being rather screwball and rebellious, and I would take any nutty thing like the Beatles. And the music wasn't frightfully original. There were no great songs there. It was just the sound was interesting. I arranged a recording test with them in Abbey Road No. 3 studio, which meant I was going to spend a couple of hours with them finding out what they could do. They had a very, very funny version of Please Please Me, which was rather slow. They did have Love Me Do. Weird things like Fat Swallows Your Feet's Too Big or Till There Was You. I got them to sing lots of different things to find out which voice was good. I was looking for the Cliff Richard or the Elvis Presley or the Tommy Steele, saying, now, is Paul going to be the main one or is John going to be the main one? And George, well, he's obviously not got such a good voice as the other two. And then it suddenly hit me right between the eyes. Why the hell should I find a solo singer? Why not just have the lot of them as they are? It wasn't their music that sold them to me. It was their charm. They were very charming people.
On Monday, the 1st of October, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and their manager Brian Epstein signed their first and only contract as the Beatles with this lineup. It replaced an earlier contract that had been signed by the group's previous drummer, Pete Best. Ringo Starr signed the contract under his real name, Richard Starkey, and the fathers of George Harrison and Paul McCartney also signed the contract, as the pair were under 21 and needed parental consent. Under the terms of the contract, Epstein agreed to undertake all necessary advertising and publicity for the artists, and to advise the artists on all matters concerning clothes, makeup, and the presentation and construction of the artists' acts in return for 25% of the group's earnings, as long as they made more than £200 per week each. The Beatles and Epstein signed the contract at Epstein's office at Nems in Whitechapel, Liverpool, 4 days before the release of their first single, Love Me Do. The signing was witnessed by Epstein's secretary, Beryl Adams. The contract was sold at auction in London in 2008 for £240,000. and again in 2015 for £265,000. That's $553,121.
I hadn't had anything to do with pop management of pop artists before that day that I went down to the Cavern Club and heard the Beatles playing. And this was quite a new world, really, for me. I was amazed by this sort of dark, smoky, dank atmosphere, this beat music playing away. And the Beatles were then just four lads on that rather dimly lit stage, somewhat ill-clad, and the presentation was, well, left little to be desired as far as I was concerned, because I've been interested in the theatre and acting for a long time. But amongst all that, something tremendous came over, and I was immediately struck by their music, their beat, and their sense of humour, actually, on stage. And even afterwards, when I met them, I was struck again by their personal charm. And it was there that really it all started. It took about 8 months to get to the stage where we had a recording contract and we were having the first record issued. And from there to the present, well, where their last record sold 500,000 copies within 10 days of issue. Actually, their first record did very well. It sold 100,000 copies. That was Love Me Do.
The best thing was it came to the charts in 2 days. And everybody thought it was a fiddle because our managers' stores send in these, record things? Returns. And everybody down south thought, he's buying them himself or he's just fiddling the charts, But he wasn't.
Actually, we've been at it a long time before that. We've been to Hamburg. I think that's where we found our style. We developed our style because of this fellow there. He used to say, you've got to make a show for the people. And he used to come up every night shouting, Mac Show. So we used to Mac Show, and John used to dance around like a gorilla, and we'd all, knock our heads together and things like that. Anyway, we got back to Liverpool and all the groups that were doing this sort of shadows type of stuff. And we came back, leather jackets and jeans and funny hair, macking show, which went down quite well.
We just bought leather jackets, not for the group. One person bought one, I can't remember, and then we all liked them, so it ended up we were all on stage with them. We'd always worn jeans because we didn't have anything else at the time, And then we went back to Liverpool and got quite a few bookings, they all thought we were German. Bill was from Hamburg, and they all said, you speak good English, things like that. So we went back to Germany, and we had a bit more money the second time. So we bought leather pants, and we looked like 4 Gene Vincents, only a bit younger, I think. And that was it, and we just kept the leather gear till Brian came along.
It was a bit sort of old hat anyway, all wearing leather gear. And we decided we didn't want to look sort of ridiculous, just going on, because more often than not, too many people would laugh. It was just stupid. We didn't want to appear as a gang of idiots. And Brian suggested that we just sort of wore ordinary suits. So we just got what we thought were quite good suits and just got rid of the leather gear. That was all.
So you had yours pinched anyway?
Oh yeah, I had my pants pinched anyway.
We didn't laugh at them in Liverpool.
We do like the fans and enjoy reading the publicity about us, but from time to time you don't realise that it's actually about yourself. You see your pictures and read articles about George Harrison, Ringo, Starr, Paul and John. But you don't actually think, that's me that I am in the paper. It's funny, it's just as though it's a different person.
When we go home, we go in early in the morning when we finish the job, and the kids, they don't know you at home. But if they find out, well, where I live, they get the drums out, and beat it out, because it's a play street, and, there's no traffic or nothing bothering them. And once, when the boys came for me, they popped in to see me mum and my dad, We had to go out the back because, there's 20 or 30 outside. And they wouldn't believe me, mother, they'd knock in saying, can we have the autographs? So it built up, you know, so much. There was about 200 kids all around the door, and there was peeping through the window and knocking, you know. In the end, my mother was ill, you know. She was terrified out of her life, just all these kids and boys and girls and that, you know.
They send us a lot of jelly babies and chocolates and things like that, because somebody wrote in one of the papers about presents and things that we had given to us, and John said he got some jelly babies, and I ate them. But ever since that, we've been inundated. We had about 2 ton a night. But the main trouble is they tend to throw them at us when we're on stage. And once I got one in my eye, which wasn't very nice. In fact, I've never been the same since.
It all sounds complaining, you know, we're not. We're just putting the point is that, you know, it affects your home more than it does yourself, you know, because you know what to expect for your parents and your family, you know.
The Beatles' debut single was released on the 5th of October in 1962. Love Me Do reached number 17 in the charts, which was a strong showing for a band's first release. Although they re-recorded the single with session drummer Andy White on September 11th, initial copies of the single carried the recording of Love Me Do from their early September 4th session. When EMI came to release the 1963 EP, The Beatles Hits, it was decided that the version featuring White was the best, and the master recording featuring Ringo's drumming was destroyed. Sales of Love Me Do / P.S. I Love You were strongest in the Liverpool area. There were strong rumors that Brian Epstein bought 10,000 copies of the single to improve its chart ranking. While quite possibly true, these were never proven to be true. 4 days later, they had no publicity or live engagements, but chose to visit London journalists. They first visited the offices of Record Mirror, where they attempted to encourage the editorial team to feature the single. This was followed by a visit to Allyn Smith, a Liverpudlian journalist on the New Musical Express. Smith asked the Beatles what they thought of Londoners, and he received the reply, "Not much. If they know you come from the north, they don't want to know." Attitudes would swiftly change once the Beatles found nationwide success. At 8:45 p.m. on Saturday the 27th, before their 4th and final live appearance at the Home Hall in Birkenhead, the Beatles recorded a radio interview for Radio Clatterbridge. It is the group's earliest surviving recorded interview. The station served 2 local hospitals, Cleaver and Clatterbridge. The Beatles were interviewed by Monty Lister, with additional questions from Malcolm Threadgill and Peter Smethurst. Lister presented 2 shows on the Radio Clatterbridge, Music with Monty and Sunday Spin. The Beatles had little experience to draw from. Just 3 weeks had passed since the release of Love Me Do, and much of the interview was spent establishing basic information about the group. John Lennon spoke of working on Please Please Me, in the hope that it would become their second single, and Paul McCartney notably described Lennon as the Beatles' leader. On the 30th of October, the Beatles flew from Liverpool to Hamburg, on this day ahead of their second residency at Hamburg's Starr Club, situated on Groy Freiheit off the Reeperbahn. They were contracted to play for 14 consecutive nights at the venue, from the 1st to the 14th of November in 1962. Although they didn't know it at the time, by the end of the year their lives would be turned upside down. They would be famous all across the United Kingdom and elsewhere, and their singles and albums would have sold into the millions.
It was in this tiny council house, number 174 Mackett's Lane, that the youngest member of the Beatles, George Harrison, lived. His father was a bus driver, and the family lived here until 1965, when the pressure of fame forced them to move to a house in nearby Warrington that George bought for his father. In stark contrast to the relative prosperity of the areas where John, Paul and George grew up, Richard Starkey, Ringo Starr, was born here in the working class heart of Liverpool, the Dingle, at number 9 Madryn Street. This house that heard Ringo Starr's first newborn cries is now derelict, the windows boarded up. Even the original door is gone, and they've replaced it with a second-hand door. Ringo lived here for 6 years, until his mother, to take advantage of lower rents, swapped this house with a friend and moved across the way to Admiral Grove.
Has Ringo suggested you should stop work as a Liverpool Corporation painter?
He certainly has, but I don't want to move. I like my job and I like the people I work with. They've been really wonderful to me.
Has Ringo's affluence made any difference to you at all?
No, not the way. I'm happy for him, like, that what he's doing, like, he's got security for the rest of his life. And we're quite happy about it, the wife and I.
Mrs. Starkey, does Ringo want to move house?
I don't really think so. He's asked us to have another house, but we're quite happy, and the neighbours and everybody's very good and proud that the boys have got to where they are.
Will the neighbours not become envious of all the wealth that's been accumulated by the Beatles?
No, not the neighbours around here. They're all very good and all quite proud.
Ringo lived here at number 10 Admiral Grove from the age of 6 until he found fame and fortune with the Beatles. The pub on the corner, the Empress, appeared on the album cover of his first solo album, Sentimental Journeys. And Ringo's stepfather and his mother clung on to this house until the fan power pushed them out.
Friday, January 11th, the Beatles' second single was their first to reach number 1. That is, according to some charts. Back in the day, there was no official single source for chart placings. On some, including New Musical Express and Melody Maker, Please Please Me made the top spot. In others, it only managed number 2. Regardless of the true chart placing, the release of Please Please Me had a key effect on the Beatles' career. It put them firmly in the big league. Although Beatlemania was still some ways away, it established them as a household name and ensured they would record a long player for EMI. On Monday, February 11th, the Beatles recorded 10 songs for their debut album Please Please Me at EMI's Abbey Road Studios in London. 3 sessions took place during the day, with the recording finishing at 10:45 p.m. Only 2 had originally been scheduled, but the third was added later on. On Friday, March 22nd, the Beatles' album Please Please Me is released. The disc went on to overtake all rivals when it bounced into the coveted number 1 slot. By April 5th, the Beatles received their first silver disc. On April 8th, Julian Lennon is born. However, the Beatles' heavy work schedule meant that John Lennon was unable to see his wife and son until Thursday, April 11th. Saturday, May 18th, the Beatles tour with Roy Orbison. On May 27th, the Beatles' first concert in Cardiff, Wales, took place during their UK tour with Roy Orbison. They performed at the city's Capitol Cinema. Also on the bill, in order of appearance, were the Terry Young Six, Ian Crawford, Louis Cordet, David Macbeth, Jerry and the Pacemakers, comedian Erky Grant, and Roy Orbison. The Beatles were the headline act and were paid £100 for the appearance. They performed a 7-song set. Some Other Guy, Do You Want to Know a Secret, Love Me Do, From Me to You, Please Please Me, I Saw Her Standing There, and Twist and Shout. With the success of the Beatles looking assured, and expectations for better things as their fame grew across the United Kingdom, Brian Epstein formed the Beatles Limited to handle their legal and business affairs on the 20th of June. Although much of their business continued to be handled by NEMS Enterprises, the new company was a partnership which allowed each of the Beatles to have a specified stake in their success and to ensure lower rates of corporate tax. The Beatles Ltd. was replaced in April 1967 with the formation of the Beatles and Company, which was later to become Apple Corps. On July 1st, the Beatles recorded both sides of their 4th UK single, She Loves You, I'll Get You, which was released on the 23rd of August in 1963. The group began recording at 5 p.m. at Abbey Road Studio 2 and finished at 10 p.m., although the session had been booked for 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. The 2 songs worked on were She Loves You and I'll Get You, the latter under its working title Get You in the End. Also in July, the Beatles completed, in under 8 hours, 18 songs for 3 editions of the radio show Pop Go the Beatles. At the BBC Paris studio in London, they rehearsed and recorded the songs along with Between the Song banter. The shows were broadcast on the BBC Light program on the 6th, the 13th, and the 20th of August in 1963. These were later released as the BBC sessions. On the 30th of July, the Beatles recorded Money, Till There Was You, Roll Over Beethoven, It Won't Be Long, and All My Loving. This was the Beatles' second EMI session of the day. The first had ended so the group could record an interview and radio session for the BBC. The evening session began at 5 p.m. and finished at 11 p.m., an hour later than scheduled. On Saturday, the 3rd of August, after nearly 300 performances at Liverpool's Cavern Club, this was the Beatles' final show at the venue. It was well known that the Beatles had outgrown the Cavern by this time, and their regular fans were grudgingly aware that their popularity could only be served by bigger venues.
This is where it all began, and for me this is where the century is going to end with me playing rock and roll, which, if you remember, the Beatles, before the Beatles, was a fabulous little rock and roll band. That was what held us together for so long and made us so good, I think, he said modestly. But I'm back here because I love Liverpool. No more fantastic place to rock out the century. Thank you very much for coming. God bless everybody.
If there was any doubt that the Beatles were a bona fide UK phenomenon by August 1963, the release of their fourth single went beyond all expectations. The songs were recorded on the 1st of July in 1963. She Loves You, with its B-side I'll Get You, was the Beatles' first single to sell more than 1 million copies in Britain. The single entered the charts on the 31st of August and remained there for 31 consecutive weeks. It reached number 1 on the 14th of September, remained there for a month, and returned on the 30th of November. The Beatles had rare days off, but on the 9th and 10th of September in 1963, John Lennon and Paul McCartney did have one engagement. They attended a luncheon of the Variety Club of Great Britain. The luncheon took place at the Savoy Hotel in London. Lennon and McCartney received the award for Top Vocal Group of the Year, a sure sign that the Beatles were rapidly becoming establishment figures. The Variety Club was the UK branch of Variety, the children's charity, which raises money for disadvantaged children. It has had strong links with the world of show business.
I think somebody's got to say a word.
It's very nice indeed to get, especially to get one each, because we usually have a bit of trouble cutting them in 4. I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's a great honour.
Thank you. Now, Paul.
Same goes for me. Thank you very much for giving us this Silver Heart. But I still think you should have given one to good old Mr. Wilson.
Ringo. Anyone who knows us knows I'm the one that never speaks, so I'd just like to say thanks a lot. I'd just like to say the same as the others. Thanks for the Purple Hearts. Silver! Sorry about that, Harold. We'd like to sincerely thank you all, and we've got to go now because the fella on the film wants us, and he says it's costing him a fortune. Thank you.
The group did not slow down. On October 1st, they recorded I Want to Be Your Man and Little Child. On October the 4th, the Beatles performed 3 songs during their first of 3 appearances on Ready, Steady, Go. The Beatles mimed Twist and Shout, I'll Get You, and She Loves You, and were interviewed by Dusty Springfield. The episode was transmitted from 6:15 p.m. to 7 p.m. Although the Beatles' popularity had been growing steadily and to increasingly frantic heights through 1963, their appearance at the London Palladium on Sunday the 13th of October catapulted them into the attentions of the mainstream media, who coined the term Beatlemania to describe the scenes of screaming fans. The Beatles' third UK EP was a collection of 4 songs taken from their debut album Please Please Me. It was released, like all the group's UK output so far, on the EMI subsidiary label Parlophone. Monday, November 4th was the night the Beatles appeared at the Royal Command performance at the Prince of Wales Theatre in London, in the presence of the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. By this point, Beatlemania was an established phenomenon, with the group drawing large, huge, and frenzied audiences across the country and beyond. This was followed by numerous TV appearances over the next few months, and beyond now they had become the world's #1 pop group. The Beatles' 5th UK single was an instant smash, with pre-orders of more than 1 million copies. The Beatles ended 1963 and started 1964 with their Christmas show. Starting from December 24th and going through to January 11th, the Beatles made their debut on the television show Val Parnell's Sunday Night at the London Palladium on the 13th of October in 1963. 3 months later, they made their return on January 12th. The difference in the Beatles' profile between then and now was huge, illustrated not least by their fee having gone from 250 pounds to 1,000 pounds. Following their first night of performances at the Olympia Theatre in Paris, the Beatles on January 16th arrived back at the Hotel George V, where they were told that I Want to Hold Your Hand had reached #1 in America. Meet the Beatles, the band's first LP on Capitol Records, was released in America on the 20th of January in 1964. It came out while the Beatles were in Paris. Please Please Me had first been released as a single in America on the 25th of February in 1963, but had failed to make an impact. The cash-in on the success of I Want to Hold Your Hand, and in anticipation of the Beatles' first U.S. visit, Vijay re-released the single. On the 7th of February 1964, the Beatles' American invasion began. The band's Boeing 707 Pan Am Flight 101 left London Airport early bound for New York City.
Any doubts about the Beatles' reception in America were dispelled the moment they touched down. New Yorkers turned out in force, and making allowance for an American accent, the screams might have been genuine Merseyside. George, John, Paul and Ringo had found a new world to conquer. Some press conference. For half an hour there was so much din you couldn't tell a word. It was a matter of everybody being patient, hoping it would begin eventually.
Anyway, we wrote off. No! Sorry. Next question. No, we need money first. How much money do you expect to take out of this country? Nothing. $10. Sorry, I know anyone. They can tell us what they think they have. How many are bald that you have to wait on feet? All of us. I'm bald. You bald? Oh, we're all bald. Don't tell anyone, please. I'm deaf and dumb, too. He's deaf from America. You guys are poor. Aren't you afraid of what the American Barbers Association is going to think of you? Well, we've grown quicker than the English ones. We'll have to go in. Did you hope to get a haircut at all? No. Nope. No. Thanks. I had one yesterday. That's no lie. It's true. No, I think he missed. No. No, he didn't. No. You should have seen him the day before.
The crowds had waited outside to cheer them all the way to the hotel. No arguing about it. The Beatles are the top pop music phenomenon of the century.
The 9th of February 1964 was the date that the Beatles' record-breaking first live appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show took place, at Studio 50 in New York City. 73 million people were reported to have watched the first show. It is still supposed to be one of the largest viewing audiences ever in the U.S.
When they arrived in America, and how come 73 million people were watching for an unknown band? No, what had happened was that the Beatles had started to have their success a little earlier. It was in late November 1963 that there was a TV news report that came to America that was going to be shown. Unfortunately, that evening was Friday, November 22nd, which is the day JFK was shot. So, and after that tragedy, they took the film clip of the Beatles and put it on the shelf. Thought, well, we can't show this now. 18 days later, Walter Cronkite said he was trying to cheer up the American nation after this tragedy. He said, hang on, didn't we have something light-hearted we can show to people? Yeah, we got that clip of those weird guys from England with the funny hair. Why don't we put that on? It'll cheer people up. And that is why 3 weeks later when they land here, there's already Beatlemania.
What did you most like about the trip, Ringo?
Oh, I just loved all of it, you know, especially Miami. The sun, you know.
I didn't know what it meant until I went over there.
Don't you get it up in Liverpool?
No, they finished up there, you know. Cut it out.
Did you ever have a chance, John, to just get away on your own without anybody recognising you?
We borrowed a couple of millionaires' houses, you know. Well,
we did. You could afford to buy a couple of millionaires' houses, couldn't you?
Yeah, we'd sooner borrow them, it's cheaper. And we did a bit of water skiing. Well, sort of, anyway.
Yeah, we had a great time.
Did your wife enjoy it over there?
Yeah, she loved it. Who?
Don't tell him he's married, it's a secret.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to. What about the taste of the fans over there? Did you find the same stuff?
You never been.
Yeah. We expected them to be very different, but they weren't at all.
Yeah.
The accent was the only thing, you know, it was the only difference. Lovely.
Did they reckon you sang in an English accent or American?
No, some fella said, how come because you're from Britain and you still sing an American accent or something? Yeah. So funny. We've been trying to explain to him that it's a Liverpool accent.
You know, but he wouldn't believe
it. He kept saying, oh, it's funny.
When you came back from France, you told me that they liked the sort of quicker numbers.
Yeah.
But what did you do? You just do all the same routine as you do here?
Yes,
because the records that are hits over there are the ones that are hits.
Oh yeah, we had
here.
to do Please Please Me over there.
Yeah.
And we haven't been doing that for a long time here, but it's in the charts.
That's history here.
Yeah.
What about the Beatles styles, all these wigs and suits and things? Are they catching on over
Yeah, they're selling well.
I hear anyway that the four of you are going to be millionaires by the end of the year.
That's nice.
Have you got time? Have you got time to actually spend this money?
What money? He said.
Doesn't he give any to you?
No. Have you seen that car of his?
You're fired. One of the things you did was visit Clay. One of the things you did was visit Cassius Clay.
He's a big lad.
Who's going to win? Clay Liston.
Ringo. I'll win him.
Well,
it all depends, you see. If you go to his gym, you have to say he wins. And if you go to Liston's gym, you say Liston will win. Yeah. The big lad gym.
Jim will win.
I think Liston will win, but Cassius Clay is a good singer.
He's a good singer.
He told us, he's Chubby Checker's cousin.
He made up a poem as well.
Yeah.
This one of the things that have been reported over here in the British Embassy. What actually happened in Washington at this place?
Well, we just sort of went. Excuse me. We just went up to this sort of embassy party given by this lord. And
the British ambassador.
Davy.
He was a lord, isn't he?
Davy.
Lord.
Oh, Lord.
Well, and we went up to his house, and there was it was a bit hectic, you know, and we judged the bingo or something.
But what about this business of somebody coming up and cutting your hair?
Oh, it was him.
Tell him about it. Whereabouts?
At the back, can you see? Look how short it is now.
It's a terrible loss.
I know. Oh my God! If
Were
I'd
you
have
short?
caught him. No. I just looked round and you just saw all the faces.
On Monday, the 2nd of March, 1964, the Beatles joined Equity, the actors' union, only minutes before they began shooting their first film, the as yet untitled A Hard Day's Night. Their union memberships were proposed and seconded by Wilfrid Brambell and Norman Rosington, their main co-stars in the film, a movie which also starred Victor Spinetti, who would later appear in every Beatles film thereafterwards. Friday, March 20th, in between filming Hard Day's Night, was the second of 3 performances given by the Beatles for the hugely popular 1960s television show Ready, Steady, Go. Saturday, March 28th, London Waxworks Museum Madame Tussauds unveiled life-size figures of all 4 Beatles. They were the first pop group to be immortalized in the museum. April 10th saw the follow-up to the Meet the Beatles. The Beatles' second album was their 3rd long player in the United States, if Introducing the Beatles, released by Vijay in January 1964, is included. The Capitol album contains songs from 4 different UK releases, with the Beatles, Thank You Girl from the From Me to You single, both sides of She Loves You / I'll Get You, and You Can't Do That from the Can't Buy Me Love single. 2 new songs, Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name, were also included. More than 1,000 fans were waiting for the Beatles at Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport when they arrived on the 8th of June. They were allowed to bypass customs and immigration procedures and were swiftly taken to the President Hotel in Kowloon, where they were booked to stay on the 15th floor. Then on June 11th, the Beatles flew from Hong Kong to Sydney, stopping en route in Darwin to allow their airplane to refuel. Although it was an unscheduled stop, 400 fans were waiting as they landed in Darwin at 2:35 a.m. July 4th saw the world premiere of A Hard Day's Night. The premiere was attended by the Beatles and their wives and girlfriends, and a host of important guests, including Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon. Nearby, Piccadilly Circus was closed to traffic, as 12,000 fans jostled for a glimpse of the group.
Piccadilly Circus, the heart of London.
Yes.
Here we have the London Pavilion, which is now a shopping arcade, but I believe in the 60s it was a cinema.
That's right, and in fact it was the place where the Beatles had the premieres of their films A Hard Day's Night, Help, and in 1968 Yellow Submarine. And all of them were Royal World Charity Gala premieres. That was the status of the Beatles in the 60s. And on all three occasions for their premieres, the traffic in Piccadilly Circus was brought to an absolute standstill. Thousands of people mobbing the streets, and you know, just amazing occasions every time. And it showed their pulling power even through to the end of the decade, that they could mob the streets like that just by turning up together.
I was doing a show in London called Oh Lovely War, musical, at Wyndham's Theatre. And they came to see it, and John particularly saw the show and he said, "Hey Vic, you got to be in our film." And that was it. And I met the producer and the director, and I was in Hard Day's Night. And of course I was a fan, you see. And suddenly when they turned up, and I loved the music, and suddenly when they turned up, it was absolutely sensational. When I first walked on the set, I was playing a television director in Hard Day's Night. Mm-hmm. And as I walked on the set before we started shooting, we started to talk. And it was as if we'd known each other all our lives. It was the most extraordinary thing. I think it's because they came from Liverpool, and I came from South Wales, that those kind of backgrounds, that we sort of hit it off straight away, and we just started talking, and, well, we haven't really stopped.
How did it compare when you met them there, you know, as they were as people, to what their public image was, and were you surprised? Or?
Well, the most extraordinary thing about them was they were really, truly extraordinary, because they were really, truly ordinary. Now, what I mean by that is, to be truly ordinary is marvellous. They were truly ordinary because they had no hang-ups. They didn't have any attitudes. They didn't have any chips on their shoulders. They were just there. And in the middle of what you could call a kind of, well, in the hurricane of Beatlemania, there was a still, small centre. In the middle of it, these four lads sat talking, and they used to say to me, "What did you talk about on the set of those films?" And I said, "Well, we'd be sitting behind this bit of white stuff out there on Hard Day's Night particularly. There'd be all these fans screaming, and we'd be sitting in there talking, and we'd talk about the Freudian interpretation of dreams as opposed to the Jungian interpretation of dreams." They were talking about what dreams meant, or they'd say things like, John would say, "I wonder, did Beethoven ever write any music for himself rather than for his patron?" They used to talk about things like, well, have laughs as well and jokes, but really straight into fascinating conversations. And when I used to say to people, they used to say the Beatles talked about Freud, because you see, at that time, you must remember that the world's changed a lot then. Pop stars, so-called, or the Fab Four, so-called, people outside thought they were dim-witted idiots, nothing, anything but. And when they wanted to discover something, John was very hungry about reading about things. Let's go somewhere, let's go to the theatre, let's go. They wanted to know about things. There were people who were really hungry for information.
What kind of things was he reading around that time?
Well, John at that time, particularly, he was actually reading the Jungian interpretation of dreams, as opposed to what Freud said. It was, I mean, it sounds heavy, but it really wasn't. It was great fun. And he'd love to talk about things like, well, if you like, cybernetics. He was talking about computers and what they would do, what they think they could do. I mean, then, when it had just started, it was really great conversation, great fun. And also, I mean, there'd be all sorts of jokes inside. I remember I was in a car with them once, and It was jammed. You couldn't get out of the car. The fans were all around it. They were pushing and screaming against the car. And we didn't know what to do. We were sitting in it. And John said, just turned around and said, push Paul out first. He's the prettiest. I mean, the laughs they had in the middle of it. But you see, because they were a still small centre, and there were 4 ordinary lads, and by that I mean truly extraordinary, by being really basic, that they kept themselves sane.
This was followed on July 10th with both the Hard Day's Night single and album. It entered the UK charts on the 18th of July, and a week later knocked the Rolling Stones' It's All Over Now from the #1 spot. It remained there for 3 weeks and spent a further 9 weeks in the charts. The A Hard Day's Night album had advance orders of over 250,000. It hit #1 on the 25th of July 1964, where it remained for an astonishing 21 consecutive weeks. In all, it spent 38 weeks in the UK charts, and by the end of 1964, it had sold more than 600,000 copies.
Behind me is Coco, the new trendy name for what used to be the Camden Palace, which in the 70s was one of London's greatest and most well-known rock venues. In the 60s, in fact from 1957 onwards, it was actually a BBC live soundstage, which means everybody that did a BBC session or recording from the Goons onwards would have used that stage in there. And that includes the Beatles. Yeah, the Beatles, the Fab Four, would have been inside what is now Coco. Take a look at that building. Behind me is Palladium House. It's just lower down than the Palladium, just off Oxford Street in central London. It was from 1965 Brian Epstein's management office. Had Brian lived, he was going to go into business partnership with Robert Stigwood. Imagine what a team that would have created. The Beatles and the Bee Gees all on one management roster. Doesn't sound too bad to me. They were, had Brian lived, also going to manage a young black artist. He was known as Jimi Hendrix. Who knows what would have happened? Palladium House was Brian Epstein's office. It's right here in central London. Behind me is the Bag o' Nails pub. In fact, just round the corner in that direction is Buckingham Palace, which is kind of fitting because in the 1960s the London press dubbed this pub, the Bag o' Nails, Buckingham Palace Mark II. You want to know why? Dead simple. The upstairs room was the drinking place of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, and just about every major 60s band that ever passed through central London. That was where they did all the drinking. That was nicknamed Buckingham Palace Mark II, and that is the Bag of Nails. Carnaby Street in London. It was once said that if aliens came back and visited right now, they'd wonder where the hell they'd arrived at. In the 60s and the 70s, it was the coolest place in the world. If you wanted that t-shirt you'd spent all your life looking for, it was here. If you wanted that jacket that looked like you just stepped off the cover of Sgt. Pepper, you came down to Carnaby Street. The mod capital of the world in the 1960s. The Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys when they were here in 1967, Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, they all shopped here, they all bought their clothing here. John Lennon once said, if you couldn't find one on Carnaby Street, there's a possibility that one had never been made. This is Carnaby Street. It's still mod today, it's really hip.
In August, the Beatles continued to tour America, finishing off the Paramount Theater in New York on Sunday, September 20th. October sees the Beatles recording more tracks, 8 days a week, Kansas City / Hey 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 Hey, Mr. Moonlight, I Feel Fine, I'll Follow the Sun, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, Rock and Roll Music, and Words of Love. November 30th, Brian Epstein appears on the long-running BBC radio series Desert Island Discs. His choice of music was George Martin Orchestra, All My Loving, Johann Sebastian Bach, Brandenburg Concerto No. 5 in D major, Quartet Tres Bien, Kilimanjaro, The Beatles, She's a Woman, Jean Sibelius, Symphony No. 2 in D major, Michael Olatunji, Odundi Odundi, Happy New Year, Max Bruch, Violin Concerto No. 1 in D minor, Carmen Amaya and Company, Fiesta de Juarez. December 1st, Ringo Starr begins a 10-day stay at University College Hospital in London. He was booked in to have his tonsils removed, an operation that took place the following day. December 4th saw the release of the Beatles' fourth Parlophone / EMI album, Beatles for Sale, which contains a mix of Lennon, McCartney originals and cover versions. Because their schedules were so busy by the later half of 1964, the Beatles resorted to recording several Cavern Club-era songs. I'll Follow the Sun was written by Paul McCartney in 1959 and dusted down when it looked like they may be lacking suitable material. December 15th saw the release of Beatles 65, the Beatles' fifth album on Capitol Records, included the majority of songs from Beatles for Sale, and added I'll Be Back, She's a Woman, and I Feel Fine. Of the Beatles for Sale songs, it left out 8 Days a Week, Words of Love, Every Little Thing, I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, What You're Doing, and Kansas City / Hey 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 Hey. Those songs were included on the June 1965 album Beatles 6. December 24th, the Beatles start another Beatles Christmas show. Following the success of the Beatles Christmas show in December 1963 and early 1964, Brian Epstein decided that the group should repeat the trick, this time at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. The formula was much the same as the previous years, with music, pantomime sketches, comedy, and several special guests. These included Freddie and the Dreamers, Sounds Incorporated, Elkie Brooks, the Yardbirds, Michael Haslam, the Mike Cotton Sound, and Ray Fell. The compeer was Jimmy Savile.
So Richard, this is the London Apollo, but it didn't always look like this, did it?
No, back in 1964, Christmas of 1964, you would have seen the letters, the Beatles Christmas show, right across the front. It was a package show that they did for their fans, comedy and music. And in those days, this was, of course, the Hammersmith Odeon. And then in Christmas of 65, they did another Beatles Christmas show. Didn't repeat it in 66.
Bottle or two, a couple of bottles, package of ciggies.
How about a special message from George?
Yeah, a very, very happy Christmas, and send me jacket back. It's cold.
John.
Gary Crimble and Manny Rudolph.
Ringo.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, see you soon.
Paul.
Lots of luck and many presents and happy Crimble. That's all, I think.
A song for Christmas. How about that?
Gary Crimble to you, Gary Crimble to you, Gary Crimble, dear Rudolph, Gary Crimble, me too. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and when he shined down
all right. Happy Christmas, all the best.
Thank you.
But the main reason that we're here really is not so much for what they did during the Christmas shows, but for an interesting little artifact around the back of the building.
So Richard, this wrought iron staircase behind the theatre looms large in the Beatles legend.
Absolutely. 1964, the film A Hard Day's Night, and there's a segment where the Beatles come rushing out of here. Ringo comes out of this door and says, "We're out." They've just escaped the pressures of filming a TV show, and they come running down this wrought iron staircase and to the song Can't Buy Me Love, and it's like in fast motion. You see them all running down this staircase and running out.
I remember, and they rush off into this field here.
There is no field here. There never was. It was just a parking lot, but basically it was spliced together in the film almost seamlessly.
February 1st, 1965, Capitol Records released their second and final Beatles EP, 4x4 The Beatles. The EP contained 4 songs, all from the albums Beatles for Sale and Beatles 65, Honey Don't, I'm a Loser, Mr. Moonlight, and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. February 23rd, the Beatles began filming their second feature film, Help. March 22nd saw the release of the early Beatles album. Capitol Records were still keen to wring as much money as possible out of Beatles fans in America, leading to the release of the early Beatles in 1965 of March. It contained 11 songs from Please Please Me. I Saw Her Standing There, Misery, and There's a Place were omitted. The 11th of May in 1965 was the group's final day of work on the film Help. The shooting had begun in the Bahamas on the 23rd of February in 1965, and the group totaled 54 days of work until this day. Several scenes in London were also filmed by director Richard Lester on the following day, May the 12th, but these did not feature the Beatles. The Beatles' U.S. label, Capitol Records, released the album Beatles 6 on the 14th of June in 1965. It was the group's 6th LP release by the label, not counting the Beatles' story documentary. Vijay and United Artists Records had each released an album too, meaning that Beatles 6 was the group's 9th album to be released stateside. As with all their releases up to 1966, the Beatles had little say in the contents of the album. It did, however, contain 2 songs recorded especially for North American listeners, covers of Larry Williams' Bad Boy, and Dizzy Miss Lizzy, both of which were taped at Abbey Road on the 10th of May in 1965.